The gentlest country music hits for decades were sung by the lovely, soaring voice of Janie Fricke. Her beautiful harmonies won her 2 awards for Female Vocalist of the Year, making her Nashville's golden child. Behind the scenes, however, the profession required more than just skill. Silence was required. Not talking about the sacrifices, the heartache, and the pressure to follow unspoken rules. At 84, Janie is no longer keeping silent. Nashville stole something much more intimate from her than just notoriety or wealth. And when she eventually opens up, a new reality shows up that might alter our perception of her legacy for all time. You'll be astounded by what she says next. Janie Fricke was merely a young woman with a voice that would not be silenced long before her name was inscribed in the history of country music. Janie was born in South Whitley, Indiana, on December 19, 1947. Her early recollections are replete with music, including plucking the guitar her father got her, singing hymns in the church choir, and harmonizing with her mother while doing household chores. She grew raised in a modest but melodic tiny village. People were aware even then. Her family, her neighbors, and her teachers. Her voice had a quality that made it soar rather than merely sing. She pursued her interest at Indiana University after high school, where she studied music instruction and developed her vocal control, which would later make her one of the most accurate and adaptable voices in the industry. Her ambition, however, was heightened by college rather than diminished. Janie's goal was to live music, not merely teach it. She packed up her goals and relocated to Nashville after graduating, seeking a position in the congested country world. However, Nashville didn't exactly show off. Janie found herself singing backing vocals, demo tracks, and advertising jingles in order to pay the bills, just like a lot of young women before her. Nevertheless, her voice started to alter the course of events there, in the recording booth shadows. She was dubbed the secret weapon by producers. She was able to fit in with any artist's style, reach perfect pitch when needed, and blend in like butter. She quickly gained popularity and was hired to support some of the greatest names in the business. She soon found herself providing harmony with Crystal Gayle, Charlie Pride, Ronnie Milsap, and Elvis Presley. No one knew her name, but you could hear her voice everywhere. Janie wasn't yet resentful. All she wanted was to be employed. Thankful to have the respect of the engineers and musicians who were aware that Janie's fingerprints were on half of the singles that came out of Nashville in the 1970s. It wasn't glitzy. She wasn't performing. She was not receiving accolades. However, she was present, contributing to a generation's soundtrack. Nashville, too? It paid attention, not in the manner she had hoped. They were looking for her voice, not her story, not her tone, not her presence. Janie was gradually rising to prominence as one of the nation's most significant voices. Nevertheless, she was invisible to the outside world. Then came the one occasion, one team effort that would ultimately propel her out of the background and into the public eye. One song was all it needed to turn everything on its head. Janie Fricke was approached to provide harmony vocals for Johnny Duncan, a budding country musician, in 1977. There was nothing novel about it. This was different from the dozens of times she had done this. Stranger was a seductive mid-tempo song that required the ideal amount of emotional equilibrium. Janie provided atmosphere as addition to harmony. Like a secret being spoken across the speakers, her voice encircled Johnny's. Unexpected things transpired when the song was broadcast. Radio stations started inquiring about the identity of the female vocalist. The label paid attention. Audiences also did. Fans were now unable to stop talking about that voice, which had previously been relegated to the background. Janie's name was prominent for the first time. No more anonymity, no more guesswork. Ever the opportunist, Nashville saw dollar signs when the woman behind the voice entered the spotlight. She was given a solo deal by the same industry that had previously utilized her to support others. Columbia Records signed her. In less than a year, she was performing as the main act for her own singles. However, this change wasn't easy. The label had no idea how to promote her. Was she overly refined? Too tender? Too secure? Her look didn't suit the new template Nashville was adopting, even though her voice was radio gold. Janie dug deep anyhow. She poured her heart into songs that shot her to the top of the charts, including Please Help Me, I'm Falling, Down to My Last Broken Heart, and the eerie ballad, It Ain't Easy Being Easy. Her melodies resonated because they were rooted in reality. She wasn't ostentatious. She was quiet. People sensed that she was genuine. Her signature was her eloquent, emotive delivery. The voice of the woman who was left behind was hers. The song finished, but the quiet heart continued to suffer. Janie Fricke was more than just a supporting star by the early 1980s. She was taking home the CMA and ACM trophies for Female Vocalist of the Year. She became a mainstay on radio and television, toured with the biggest artists in the industry, and competed on the biggest stages in the country music industry. But there were conditions attached to success. She was being reshaped by the same industry that had previously disregarded her. Managers desired a more audacious image. Crossover hits were pushed by producers. Now, the woman who used to sing from the heart was being asked to conform to a mold that wasn't her own. Even though Janie gave a courteous nod, smiled through it, and followed instructions, she understood in her heart that something was being taken. She had less control the higher she went, and the floodlight that had appeared to be the answer was beginning to burn. The voice belonged to Janie Fricke. That was never questioned. However, the voice was just one component of the package in Nashville. The pressures increased in tandem with her stardom. For a nicer appearance, not for better music. The executives who had previously kept her out of the spotlight now wished to make her a marketable celebrity. However, authenticity was not part of their definition of marketable. Exaggerated femininity, heavier makeup, styled hair, and shorter skirts were all part of it. Frustrated by her refusal, one producer allegedly yelled, "Janie, you look like you belong in a church pew, but you sing like a star." It was not a praise. It served as a warning. Women in Nashville have always been expected to sell more than just their voices. They needed to sell a fantasy and an image, and Janie, who was quiet and reserved, didn't fit the bill. She made an effort to comply. She allowed stylists to alter her appearance, appeared for the glitzy commercial pictures, and donned the clothes. But she felt a little less like herself with each makeover. She would joke with intimate friends behind the scenes. "I'm just Janie from Indiana, but they want a Barbie doll." She continued to smile, though. She was aware of the consequences for women who resisted too strongly. Their documents were put on hold. They had to cancel their tours. Silently, their names vanished off the list. She therefore obeyed, but not fully. She maintained the groundedness, emotion, and authenticity of her performances even when they urged her to embrace the glamour. And there was notice of that resistance. She was called challenging by some in the industry, or overly simple. They failed to grasp that she was refusing to compromise on her identity, not just her style. Janie had risen through the ranks for years using only her talent and heart. She now had to face a painful reality as the label attempted to change who she was. In a separate sense, the industry that professed to honor her was working to erase her. Not by disregarding her, but by substituting a brand for her essence. It was a result of the pressure. Every photo session turned into a bargain. There were prepared talking points for each interview. Every music video was an attempt to make people smile despite their suffering. They wanted to talk about her hair, but she wanted to talk about the emotion, the lyrics, and the craft. She started to feel as though she was in a dazzling cage. On the inside, a stranger, but on the outside, a star. The very characteristic that set her apart. Publicists and image experts were now trying to extract her genuineness. After giving her a platform at last, Nashville demanded that she give up all that had led her there. And that expense would become more difficult to bear as the years passed. Few people were aware of the suffering Janie Fricke endured just outside of the spotlight, even as the cameras captured her soaking up the glory of accolades and #1 hits. Janie became an expert at donning the mask of fame, which has a way of hiding sadness. Not the pop star, but a fellow musician and bassist who was aware of the grueling hours, never-ending tours, and pressure to perform both on and off stage. She married Randy Jackson in 1981. They were a team initially, but traveling is a relentless experience. Janie's professional life was in ruins. Every new hit also meant a new commitment, a new city, a new show, and a new week away. Slowly the strain set in. Their formerly close relationship quickly turned into a long-distance, one with no end in sight. What they lost, however, was the true heartbreak, the one she never discussed in public. Janie experienced several miscarriages during that time, each of which was a personal tragedy. She had always envisioned herself as a mother, juggling family and music, and one day rocking a baby rather than a stadium. However, Each time that hope materialized, it vanished. Nashville, too? It had no time for mending, no room for mourning. The performance must continue. In dressing rooms, she would sob quietly before drying her tears and into the spotlight. Nobody ever found out. It was too expensive for her for them to. Women in the workplace have a tacit knowledge of one another. In order to avoid being used against you, pain has to be kept hidden. You were unstable if you were overly emotional. You were untrustworthy if you requested time off. Janie buried everything. The anger, the bewilderment, the despair. She put it all together and poured it into her songs, singing heartbreak with such genuineness that her followers cried, without ever understanding how genuine those feelings were. However, there were fissures. Her friends noted that she became more reserved and quiet. Behind the scenes, the glitter faded, and when her marriage finally ended, there was only a peaceful separation and a lady left alone with her music and her memories. No spectacular headline or messy tabloid spread. Nashville praised her work ethic, professionalism, and grace, but what they truly praised was her willingness to suffer inconspicuously for the company and her quiet. There was a cost associated with each standing ovation. And that cost for Janie Fricke was a heart that was silently breaking in the wings, dreams postponed, and love lost. Janie Fricke's name had previously been associated with grace, passion, and flawless vocals by the time the 1990s arrived. However, being a legend soon becomes a liability in a field that values novelty and flash. The landscape of country music was changing. Younger features and slicker sounds were replacing the new traditionalist wave. Shania Twain was gaining popularity, and Garth Brooks had skyrocketed. The sound and image of the genre were evolving. All of a sudden, Janie stopped receiving calls. She was no longer acknowledged by the radio stations that used to play her frequently. Her most recent singles hardly made the charts. Sensing the trend, her label started to reduce its marketing. The voice that had previously reverberated over arenas was suddenly disappearing once more. But not voluntarily this time. She was still the same. Her voice was still powerful. Her songs continued to be delivered with grace and heartbreaking honesty. However, youth was the new currency in Nashville. Furthermore, Janie was no longer valued. The irony was awful. She was being removed from the industry after years of influencing its sound. With peaceful apathy, not with scandal or drama. Her name used to appear on marquees in the towns she would drive through, but suddenly it was no longer there. Her legacy was being crammed into vintage country slots and pushed to late-night radio blocks by musicians half her age and twice as well-funded. "We love Janie, but she's not what we're playing right now," one coder even said to her team. Her career seemed to be coming to an end, and the industry didn't even have the grace to bid her farewell. The decline in sales and the empty phone lines, however, weren't the most painful things. It was the sensation of being thrown away, the knowledge that all the years she had dedicated herself to the music, giving up her own aspirations, and following all the rules had been for nothing the moment she no longer fit the mold. Nashville. She was abandoned like a one-hit wonder by the metropolis that had promised her the world. And Janie stayed calm through it all. She refrained from snapping. She didn't plead for another opportunity. She continued to sing in local festivals, community theaters, and smaller venues. For at her heart, she never pursued celebrity. Music was what she was after. But the hush from the very machine she had previously fueled became deafening as the large stages dwindled out of her grasp. Nashville has not simply abandoned its mission. The story had been rewritten without her. Janie Fricke had the option to leave. She had the option to embrace the story that her time had come to an end and let the rejection break her heart. However, she was never like that. Permission was not necessary for Janie to continue doing what she liked. She returned to the foundations that had always supported her, even after the major labels moved on and radio forgot her name. Authentic music. Actual persons. Genuine relationship. She started playing in little theaters and places that still remembered her voice, as well as at county fairs, regional festivals, and smaller venues. The throngs were faithful, but no longer in the tens of thousands. Children, occasionally even grandkids, were brought to see her play by fans who had grown up listening to her songs. And each and every time, Janie gave them her all, no pride, no resentment, only thankfulness. In ways Nashville never permitted, she regained control of her craft. She ultimately owned her master recordings and creative decisions when she started her own label in the early 2000s, which gave her the freedom to re-record her successes as she saw fit. She put out acoustic renditions of her favorite songs, Christmas collections, and gospel CDs. She rediscovers the delight of creating for the purpose of expression, not charts, free from corporate meddling. She also started mentoring up-and-coming female artists, providing the kind of support she herself never experienced as a young woman. She was more than just a legend to them. She was a teacher, a survivor, and a wise voice in a field that still didn't know how to respect its women. Janie talked candidly about the commercial side of music, the dangers of celebrity, and the value of maintaining your individuality. She wasn't attempting to make a dramatic return while the world attempts to take it away. She had no intention of making headlines. All she was doing was taking back what had always been hers. The freedom to be heard how she wants to be heard. And slowly, a silent redemption started to take shape. Her music was once again played on legacy stations. Interview requests were made by journalists, eager to rediscover the woman whose impact had been overlooked but had never truly vanished. Audiences now stood for her tenacity as much as her hits when she took the stage. Because Janie Fricke never gave up despite every loss, every industry betrayal, and every moment that was destroyed. She continued to sing. Finally, the world had begun to pay attention once more. She broke their mold, note by note, piece by piece, not because she fit it. It was a low-key event with no publicity. During one of her infrequent solo appearances in Texas, in a backstage interview, a question that Janie had been asked hundreds of times before was posed by the interviewer. What does country music mean to you in retrospect? This time, though, something was different. For the first time in her career, Janie didn't filter her response. She paused. Her eyes glistened. It means everything, and it took everything, she added, her voice breaking. There was silence in the room. The unraveling followed. Waves of anguish, fury, the pain of forgetting, and decades of carefully suppressed emotion poured out. She talked about the marriage that slowly fell apart under the strain of touring and silence, and the miscarriages she was instructed to conceal. She recalled feeling invisible the first time a label urged her to alter her appearance. I lost my identity, she stated. They gave me advice on how to laugh as well as how to walk and dress. I followed instructions, and each time I nodded, I kind of vanished. She talked of the times she sobbed herself to sleep in hotel rooms while traveling, holding onto the phone and questioning whether the price of fame was too much. She described how the industry silently abandoned her once her chart rankings fell. There was no farewell. No one said, "You've done enough," she muttered. I was the voice of the year one day, and then I simply vanished the next. It wasn't a dramatic drop of tears. They arrived gradually and continued. Janie had no desire for pity. She didn't harbor resentment. She was just worn out from bearing a story that no one had ever requested to hear in its entirety. She claimed I was too gentle, too calm, and too simple. However, I meant every word when I wrote songs about genuine love and agony. She acknowledged that, particularly in the 1990s, when the industry's quiet seemed louder than any applause ever had, there were moments when she wanted to leave the profession forever. However, something inside her refused to give up. She claimed that the only aspect of me they couldn't remove was the music, so I couldn't give up. Stunned, the interviewer did not interrupt. That day, they recorded more than just an interview. It was a reckoning with the machine that had both built and ruined her, a revelation that had been kept for too long, and the unraveling of decades. At the age of 84, Janie Fricke at last gave herself permission to grieve not just for what she had lost, but also for what she had gone through. The opportunity to live from the start according to her rules wasn't an emotional collapse. It was a revelation of reality. One last shuddering utterance. From a woman who had dedicated her life to a community that never allowed her to be who she truly was. So far, Nashville didn't win in the end. It attempted to mold her, mute her, and destroy her. However, Janie Fricke remains. Even at 84, her voice still reverberates across the country music industry, even though she isn't walking the red carpet or at the top of the charts. Her impact is enduring even though it isn't always obvious. She is now cited as a model for quiet strength, emotive delivery, and vocal control by young female musicians. You can hear her spirit woven into the harmonics of any sorrowful ballad on contemporary country radio, if you listen carefully. Nashville's attempts to steal her dignity, her artistic ability, and her sense of self were never quite successful. Janie transformed quiet into sovereignty because she refused to let resentment control her. She created her own after the industry shut down. She took back her catalog when labels lost interest. She sung even after listeners had forgotten. She created a legacy that was more powerful than any award by doing this. Her music being easy isn't easy. Tell me a falsehood. He is a pain in the heart. They are more than hits. They are time capsules of emotion. Millions of listeners felt seen by her words, so they held up mirrors. Even though the authorities frequently ignored her, her music continued to reach those in need. The problem with authenticity is that fashion is out of style. Gatekeepers are outlasted by it. Drama, scandal, or reinvention did not characterize Janie Fricke's career. It was characterized by honesty, fortitude, and a voice that would not be exhausted or cast aside. She now leads a modest but proud life, giving infrequent performances, thinking frequently, and helping others whenever she can. She longs for honesty more than praise. She now owns her tale, in all its splendor, anguish, and light, after decades of having it molded by others. The victories, the defeats. She created the essence of the act, but Nashville provided her with a stage. Despite its attempts to steal, it was never able to capture her essence. She still owns that. The industry might forget. Time might seem hazy. Legends like Janie Fricke endure despite the details. They serve as the foundation and roots from which others grow. One reality will endure even after everything is settled. The names have faded from the marquees, and the charts have been reshuffled numerous times. Janie Fricke outlasted Nashville, not just made it through. Silently. In a melody. In power.